Hello, welcome to Bespoke Unit. I'm CP, and in this video, I'm reviewing the Rocky Patel Decade. As per usual, this cigar review was conducted using the Bespoke Unit Cigar Formula, a quantifiable review matrix that you can use at home. Simply look in the description where you'll find a link which will teach you how to use it, as well as provide you with a blank PDF version. Furthermore, these cigars have been spending the last 3 weeks in the Boveda acrylic humidor that you can just about see behind me, if it's not too dark, behind the green leather chair. They were stored with 69% Boveda packs and were closely monitored with a Boveda butler. Released way back in 2008, the Rocky Patel Decade marked the 10th anniversary of Rocky Patel cigars. It was first launched as a limited edition, and as things do, it ended up becoming a regular lineup for the brand. Today, the Rocky Patel Decade is manufactured at the Tavicusa factory in Esteli under the watchful eye of Hamlet Paredes. It is made by hand, presumably with an accordion bunching style. The cigar features an Ecuadorian Sumatra wrapper, as well as a top-secret blend of Nicaraguan tobaccos used for the binder and filler. With that being said, let's jump into the look and feel. Well, first of all, this is the Toro 6.5 by 52. It is available in a number of other vitolas, such as Torpedos and Robustos. There are even a couple of very small vitolas as well. What's quite interesting is, as it's a box press cigar, it features a remarkably straight construction with no bumps or soft spots. Furthermore, the spring is very firm and occasionally bordering on hard. It has an antique oak hue on the wrapper, as well as a slightly oily sheen that reflects some of the light. The veins can be a little bit on the rustic side. Indeed, it's touch coarse. You do have a couple of bunched areas here, and as you can see on this other cigar, there are a few visible veins. However, it does actually lend to the cigar's distinctive style. The aromas of the foot, which I've noted on the Bespoke Unit Cigar Formula, consist of tonka bean, argwood, so a resinous oud, as well as some cacao. Moving on to the Prelight here, as you can see, I've already done a guillotine cut on this cigar. So it provides just the right amount of resistance and produces a good airflow. However, there is a little bit of tightness, and that's probably just caused by a slight knot, which you may see on the foot of the cigar. However, it's not distracting, and it doesn't really bother me that much. I do like it when cigars have a bit more resistance. I do believe that the other cigars won't have knots on the foot like this, but otherwise the construction is very good. In terms of flavor, it does offer a nice bouquet, which consists of some very rich chocolatey notes, as well as some tonka bean, as was experienced on the smell of the foot, as well as caraway seeds that offer a slightly bracing and refreshing residue on the lips. So I guess the next step is to light this up and smoke it, so I'll see you in a minute. So I'm just finishing the first third of the Rocky Patel Decade here, and straight from the start we have a rich, opulent and full-bodied smoke. I have had some minor burn issues, a little bit of waviness. The burn line is thick and oily, but we'll cover that more in the burn and combustion later on. In terms of aromas, this is dominated by cacao and rich, thick, syrupy, chocolatey notes. You also have an intriguing fruity note, which is a little bit like black cherries, but I would liken closer to damson plums. Indeed, it almost has a boozy effect, as if it was a damson gin. And on top of that, there's a strong element of pepper, which adds texture and substance to the smoke, especially in the retrohale. So I'm about halfway, maybe a little bit more through the second third, and unfortunately the burning issue hasn't really corrected. In fact, something a bit unusual is happening here, but hopefully that will balance out. I'm not going to touch it up because I want to see where it goes. But otherwise, we have a nice ash backbone, beautifully white and steely grey. But in terms of the flavors and the character of the cigar, it has, of course, grown in intensity, but not by much. It's still quite intense compared to the first third, which was already quite full-bodied. It's developed a slight bitterness, and this is reflected in the flavor. One of the most dominant flavors is coffee grounds or even espresso beans. And meanwhile, the fruitiness that I experienced in the first third, this has transitioned from the damson plums that I mentioned earlier, and now in fact has grown a greater resemblance to black cherries, but not fresh cherries. I'd say cooked cherries, almost like into a jam. However, it is a jam that is without any added sugar, so the flavor is quite tart, which is intriguing as it sort of complements the bitterness of the coffee quite well. Meanwhile, the pepper note has persisted from the first third. It hasn't grown in much intensity, but it's certainly present. You can feel the texture of the pepper on the tip of the tongue, and it tickles the nostrils when you retrohale. We're now well into the final third, and the Rocky Patel Decade hasn't really built in intensity. It isn't this crescendo that you normally expect from a first, second, third. And in a way, that's actually a good thing. I think if it got significantly stronger in the final third, it would be almost overwhelming. The overall flavor profile in the final third has become a lot less complex than the first two. Indeed, it's a simple oak and pepper accord. The flavors are quite deep and verbose and profound, but they don't really have much variety. It's quite savory, it's meaty. You do have a nice thickness in the texture, but you are lacking the fruit and the coffee grounds and the cacao that were experienced in the first two thirds. The overall complexity of the cigar, though, is actually quite refined. You do have an intricate variety of families of aromas, such as the aforementioned fruits and the cacao, the coffee grounds. It remains, though, quite consistent with what you would expect from a full-bodied cigar. In terms of mouthfeel, it does have a thick, unctuous texture that leaves a slight film on the tongue. Its astringence is quite balanced, even though there was some bitterness and tart flavors, especially in the second third. It does remain very balanced on the palate. You don't get any excessive salivation or dryness in the mouth, and you do get tongue stimulation throughout each part of the tongue. With regards to the life cycle, there is some development in each third. However, it's not going to be a big change in flavor or in body or in strength. You do have a slight increase between the first, second, and maybe even the third, but it isn't going to be excessively profound in its development. As for the finish in the flavors, well, as I said, the final third is quite simple. You're looking at an oak and pepper accord. You're not going to have these very distinctive notes that are going to stay on the tongue for a good quarter of an hour. Here in this case, it tends to fade relatively soon, but it does linger for a while. As for the residual scent of the room, it's fragrant, but it's bordering on overbearing. It's very strong, it's very heavy, these bold, oaky notes that tend to waft in the room, so I would recommend that either you smoke it outdoors or in a room with good ventilation. When it comes to the Rocky Patel Decade's combustion and burn qualities, as I said in the first and second third, I was having a couple of issues, but however, looking here in the final third, this cigar hasn't been touched up and it has improved somewhat. The draw, as I noted in the Prelight, felt a little bit tight, but it seemed to have expanded quite nicely and it remained consistent throughout the whole cigar after lighting, so I wasn't having too much resistance or too much tightness. The temperature, the cigar stays relatively cool throughout the whole experience. It only starts to heat up towards the end, and thanks to the box-pressed format, it does help control that temperature somewhat. And finally, the ash backbone. The ash backbone is really good, and I would have had a much longer ash if I wasn't a clumsy oaf and knocked it with my wrist and got it everywhere. Otherwise, I would have a good ash here that would be about an inch or a little bit more longer. So you can produce some good, strong ash, and it is a sign of quality construction. When it comes to the overall experience of the Rocky Patel Decade, so the bands, first off, I do like the overall presentation, but I can't help feel that the color and choice of typography feels a little bit dated. Indeed, this is a release from 2008, and I believe it hasn't had a facelift, and it does feel like something from that period. Nevertheless, it's very functional. You have two bands, the first band saying Rocky Patel with the logo in the middle, as well as the second band with Decade 10th anniversary. This yellow color is extended thanks to a slight motif, which has a sort of Latin vibe to it, and it is decorated with golden stars. The box, I'm afraid I don't have a box for reference, but I did take a look online. It has this dark, rustic-looking black box with a stenciled diagram in the center. Unfortunately, I can't say much more on that. As for the value of the cigars, I was quite surprised to learn that these have an RRP of $14 each, which is, I'd say, on the high side for a Nicaraguan blend. Nevertheless, you can pick them up for about $12 each when you buy a box of 20. So you would have to invest for a whole box, but it does reduce the price slightly. And finally, when it comes to the occasion and when you would consider smoking this cigar, I'd say this is better served as a casual cigar that you would enjoy around at the backyard with a couple of buddies, maybe during a barbecue. This is more really a late evening, nighttime cigar, and it would be great during the winter time next to a wood fire with a stiff drink in your hands. Otherwise, I wouldn't really take this to a special occasion, nor would it be something I'd choose for an exclusive lounge or a social club. Nevertheless, this is something you could certainly consider, for example, at a bachelor party, especially if your buddies are avid smokers, though I would not recommend this for beginners. And finally, looking at the pairings, this is just something we have in the bottom right-hand corner of every cigar formula. It isn't reviewed, it isn't scored, it's just an exercise of how we could consider enjoying the cigar. So firstly, I put down saffron chocolate, and I was thinking specifically of this saffron chocolate by Argent Curve, which is an artisanal Nicaraguan brand. They use real saffron, which is then included into the chocolate. So you have the pieces of saffron, and it has a rich spiciness, and the chocolate is very high quality, and you're going to have a rich and thick, luscious texture with it. This would pair very nicely with the cigar, probably add an element of additional spice since the cigar is more on the savory gourmand side of things, and they would complement each other quite well through contrast. Otherwise, you can consider something simple like pretzels or rugbrod being a Danish rye bread. Alternatively, cured meats such as prosciutto or jambon bayonne or even brasola would be a great option with this cigar. When it comes to beverages, I would personally go for something like a cognac or any other form of brandy that is going to be well aged and have some deep amber notes to accompany it. Otherwise, you could also consider Damson Gin, which is actually quite reminiscent of the first third. I did mention it earlier. Damson Gin is quite an easy beverage to make at home. You simply get some gin and put some damson in there, let them age. You can also add sugar to add a touch of sweetness, but I prefer it without any sugar. I think that would pair quite well as well. Alternatively, you can consider the classic like an espresso. Indeed, with the coffee ground notes you especially get in the second third, it would be the perfect pairing. Probably go for a double or a triple espresso if you want something to last long enough, or you could top it up with water, make an Americano instead. And finally, why not a Highland single malt Scotch? I believe this would be the best choice of whiskey that you could go for. Something from Ireland is going to be too floral. Same could be said for a bourbon. Meanwhile, a Highland single malt Scotch is going to have more character and body to it to pair well with the cigar. That's all from me today. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, don't forget to leave us a like and a subscribe if you want more cigar reviews. And comment if you have any questions about the Rocky Patel Decade or any thoughts or experiences of your own. And until the next video, why don't you head to bespokeunit.com to check out all the other men's lifestyle subjects that we cover. Until next time, take care.